Beyond 3D.
Saturday evening in and around the peninsula. Welcome to Beyond 3D. Matt and Clint here with you. Hopefully everyone has had a great week. It has been an interesting one. A lot of news going on, a lot of things going on. But this week I decided, what should I do? A lot of Facebook stuff, a lot of YouTube stuff going on.
Good evening, everyone. I am here, just kicking back and letting Matt do his thing.
I wanted to go back to an oldie but a goodie, and I wanted to start this week's show with us listening to a little thing I heard on Facebook and on YouTube. One led to the other, and I went to YouTube and saw something about a secret trip to Antarctica, and it was taken by Barack Obama.
Yeah, I know.
Heard a lot of things about a lot of guys going down that way, so I thought what we would do is start the show off by listening in and seeing exactly what is going on down there. Maybe it's something that we should be all paying a lot of attention to.
Beyond 3D.
What was the reason behind Obama's secret trip to Antarctica? What was the reason for CIA Director James Clapper's simultaneous visit to Australia? Why did Russia's top religious leader go to Antarctica? There has been a virtual media blackout about these highly unusual trips made by officials in Russia and the US. There are a couple of sources that cited Obama traveled to the southern tip of Argentina before crossing the Drake Passage to Antarctica. Indeed, Obama's secret trip comes at a highly unusual time. It follows on the heels of a visit by Patriarch Kirill of Russia. Kirill met with Pope Francis in Havana, Cuba, less than 1 week before he departed for Antarctica. Media sources described the meeting between the two religious leaders as urgent. Nothing like this has happened since the 1054 AD schism that separated Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. Why an urgent meeting between these leaders was called after a millennium of never meeting with one another is a mystery. The mainstream media reported that the meeting between Francis and Kirill was meant to condemn persecution of Christians around the world and to foster ecumenical dialogue. But again, it comes at an unusual time, because 4 days after this meeting, Kirill arrived in Antarctica and performed a religious ceremony blessing the land and water surrounding the continent. He praised the barren lands of Antarctica as, quote, a model of an ideal humanity. Kirill also said the following, quote, Antarctica is the only place where there are no weapons, no military activity, there are no scientific studies focused on the emergence of a new means of destruction. It is a perfect image of humanity and a testimony to the fact that people can live like this. No borders, no weapons, no hostile competition, that they can cooperate and feel as members of one family, unquote. The reason I find Obama and Russian visits to Antarctica very strange is the following. There was another country, another regime, that visited Antarctica just before a Great World War started. The Nazis led an expedition of 33 members, including scientists, to Antarctica just before the start of World War II in September 1939. Their expedition to New Swabia lasted from December 1938 to February 1939. It is known that the Nazis took thousands of photos using airplanes during this expedition. They also took reels of colored film, which was rare at the time and very expensive to produce. The regime was clearly looking for something in Antarctica. But what was it? What were they there for? 2 earlier expeditions to Antarctica by the Nazis were also very alarming. They were intent to map out the terrain of the continent using hot air balloons for aerial footage. The Nazis even attempted, during these 2 expeditions, to walk across the entire continent and map out its landscape. it's still unclear why they engaged in so much surveying. Let us go back to World War II and listen to an interview given by an American naval officer named Richard Byrd. Byrd was stationed and lived in Antarctica for some time. Byrd made astonishing claims about the continent, that it could be the key to a future controversy that would erupt between various countries. Not merely regarding the issue of resources, that precious metals, mineral deposits, and even uranium have been found in Antarctica. No, Richard Byrd seems to suggest that something else was there.
Admiral Byrd, you've been to both the North Pole and the South Pole. Is there any unexplored land left on this Earth that might appeal to adventurous young Americans?
Yes, there is. And not up around the North Pole, because it's getting crowded up there now, because they find out it's really usable, not only to live in, but militarily. But strangely enough, there's left in the world today an area as big as the United States that's never been seen by a human being. And that's beyond the pole, on the other side of the South Pole, from Middle America. And I think it's quite astonishing that there should be an area as big as that unexplored.
This is a tremendous
So
job.
there's a lot of adventure left down at the bottom of the world.
Admiral, an expedition to which I believe you're the advisor is now en route. What is that expedition doing?
Well, that's the icebreaker Echo, and it's a reconnaissance expedition. It's going down to the South Pole area to make certain observations and to look for some bases. They will be back in April, and they will report back, and upon the information we get from that undertaking, we will base the bigger expedition that's to follow.
Is that very definitely planned, or is that...
That is being planned right now. So I'm willing to say to you that there will be a number of expeditions that will follow, I think, year after year.
Richard Byrd verified that Antarctica wasn't about resources, but rather that the Nazis had established secret bases for some reason. Perhaps they were protecting something. Operation High Jump, coordinated by Byrd, which included US, Russian, Australian, and British forces, was meant to close in on the Nazis' strange operations in Antarctica. The logo for the Nazis' third expedition to Antarctica shows that they were interested in a particular portion of the continent called New Swabia. You can see on this emblem that there were lines drawn to bring your attention to an exact coordinate, ending on a particular target. Perhaps the Nazis were hiding a secret in plain sight, that they had located something. Were they pointing us, perhaps, to a hole that existed into the Earth? A pathway into the center of a hollow Earth. There is evidence to suggest that the Nazis believed in the hollow Earth and held to an understanding that perhaps there was a passageway to the other side. While hollow Earth is not a popular idea these days, it was during World War II. In fact, it was suggested that most of the top Nazi officials believed in a hollow Earth concept. Many within Nazi pop culture also believed in a hollow Earth, including German writer Karl Neupert. In the book called Between Science and Fiction, The Hollow Earth as Concept and Conceit, the author documents that Neupert began what appeared to be a cult following of hollow Earth believers in Germany at the time. The idea was that the Earth was shaped like an eyeball, a portal leading into it where the North Pole is located, and another portal leading into it where the South Pole is located. The inner portion of the Earth is hollow. Likewise, the eye has an entry where blood is pumped into it, but the actual eye globe is hollow, filled with a substance called vitreous humor to protect it. Toward the end of the eye, a lens is located that resembles a mass of land in an ocean. At the center of this landmass is another hole, the pupil. The strange resemblance between hollow Earth and a human eyeball is unmistakable. Antarctica was a point of entry into the very pupil of the Earth. Interestingly, many Christians throughout history have held to a view of a hollow earth without realizing it. That's because for many centuries, Christians have viewed hell as a place underneath the crust of the earth, a place of fiery torment where condemned souls go. The Nazis, however, believe the opposite, that perhaps this place inside the earth was not for condemned souls, but a place where the master race, their ancestors, dwelled. Nazi belief in the location of the master race was based on a New Age theosophist who had a profound influence on their philosophy and esotericism. Helena Blavatsky suggested that inner earth was not the place of hell, but a place where the master race lived. Admiral Richard Byrd is arguably one of the most controversial voices on the subject of Hollow Earth. The truth is that Byrd organized a mission called Operation High Jump to stop Nazi ambitions in Antarctica even after World War II had ended. It was officially classified as a reconnaissance mission, yet several members of Operation High Jump died mysteriously.
Admiral, you make it sound a little clouded. Are there that many expeditions now there or en route there?
Well, you know, as I said, it's the most peaceful place in the world, but I don't think it will be for long because of this intense interest on the part of other nations and this nation.
This latest expedition now on the way is a government expedition, I take it.
Yes, that's the government. I tell you one reason they're interested. It's by far the most valuable, important place left in the world for science. That's why the scientific groups all over the nation are really interested. But more important than that, it has to do with the future of the nation, those to come after us, or even during your lifetime.
The United States was on a mission to find whatever the Nazis hid in Antarctica. Shortly after Operation High Jump was completed, the United States began to promote the idea that the Earth was a solid ball with maybe a small core of magma, no entry or exit into the inner Earth, no settlements or secret bases underground, no potential escape for the Nazis. This idea came into full force using the US's newly created NASA. Byrd, who had begun to speak out about Hollow Earth towards the end of his life, died approximately 1 year before NASA was launched by the US. Certainly, if this was merely a Nazi claim, with no other substantiating commentary or research, then we could just simply disregard it. But it is a fact that Hollow Earth maps have been drawn for centuries. Famous members of the Illuminati, including Edgar Allan Poe and Jules Verne, alluded to Hollow Earth in their writings, that there was a world underneath the crust that we stand on. One of the most striking affirmations that an opening to another world was identified was made by Richard Byrd himself. Byrd's diary was mysteriously published in 1990 by a company called Inner Light. In the 68-page publication, Byrd suggested that a land existed beyond the pole, where he was stationed for many years around the time of World War II. He made two mysterious bombshell statements in his diary. One was that he was ordered to keep silent about everything he had witnessed in Antarctica, and two, that he had witnessed the land beyond the pole, the center of the great unknown. Let us not forget that thousands of top-secret scientists in Germany seemed to disappear overnight at the end of the war. Some people believe that they escaped to the United States in something called Operation Paperclip, but some others are a bit more suspicious, thinking that perhaps these scientists made a quick exit off of the face of the world, literally, to the hollow reaches of the Earth, perhaps into the very inner quarters and to the location where another race of beings dwell. Did the Nazis go underground when the time came for their demise? Is the route of an escape in Antarctica?
Beyond 3D.
Well, Clint, there you have it.
What were some of the key points in that clip there, Matt?
A little bit of Antarctica and all of the fact that you have Obama.
Bring him back. Bring him back.
Kerry. Religious leaders.
Heads of state.
All kinds of military people going down to the continent, astronauts included. And I think the thing that struck me about that one, Clint, the most was this. Australia was involved.
That's it. Cue the music.
In Operation High Jump. Therefore, I think you and I are going to have to do an FOI, or Freedom of Information search, to see what information we can turn up for Beyond 3D about what was going on down there as well. World War II, Hollow Earth. Today, back to Flat Earth. Admiral Byrd talking about Beyond the Pole, a totally different land which was more like an oasis, where we think there is a lot of
Ice?
snow and ice.
Snow.
Oh well, we're going to have to try to figure out what's going on with all of that. Your thoughts are necessary, and my thoughts are necessary as well on this, as are our listeners. So what we're all going to have to do is a little bit more research, because this is getting quite interesting, especially the part about scientific people escaping after World War II, not to the United States and not to Argentina, but maybe underground. Maybe it's a bit hollow down there and they're just hiding what's actually going on until another time where they can come out from wherever they are. We'll just have to see.
I'll tell you what, Matt, is coming out and being discovered at the moment. Brand new extraterrestrial biological life forms discovered here on Earth in water. And tonight, Beyond 3D presents investigative Emmy Award-winning journalist Linda Moulton Howe with the latest scientific data on this classified discovery. Beyond 3D.
There was the most provocative title in the April 4th, 2006 journal Astrophysics and Space Science. It reads, quote, "The red rain phenomenon of Kerala and its possible extraterrestrial origin," unquote. Kerala is called God's own country and is situated on the Malabar coast in southwestern India. Besides attracting tourists to its beautiful beaches and lush trees where exotic wildlife live, the land supports companies which grow tea, coffee, rubber, cashew, peppers, cardamom, vanilla, nutmeg, and cinnamon. 5 years ago, several red-colored rains fell over Kerala. Not just one rain, but several. The red rain stained white T-shirts, and residents wondered what was happening. News of the red rain mystery reached Dr. Godfrey Lewis, a professor of pure and applied physics at Mahatma Gandhi University in the city of Kottayam in the state of Kerala. He collected many test tubes full of the red-colored rainwater and put some of the odd liquid under a microscope. He told me by phone recently that when he first saw that red rain magnified, he was struck by the beautiful rust color of what seemed to be living cells. The cell diameters averaged 10 microns, a little bigger than a human blood cell, which is about 7 microns. And you can see photomicrographs of the red rain cells. Over several months, Dr. Lewis began experimenting with different temperatures to see if the cells would respond. As the temperature rose, he saw more activity. Eventually, he got up to 300 degrees Celsius, which is about 600 degrees Fahrenheit. He also increased the pressure to 300 pounds per square centimeter. It's assumed that normal Earth life would die at such a high temperature and pressure. But the red cells in the Kerala rainwater seemed to thrive. During his experimentation with temperatures and pressures, Dr. Lewis studied the cells under a microscope. As he watched, the cells produced smaller cells internally that were colorless or whitish. He began calling those new little cells daughters of the original mother cells. Once he counted as many as 15 daughter cells bud inside of one of the adult mother cells. As the daughter cells grew, their cell walls also became red, and eventually the daughter cells erupted through the wall of the mother cell. This is clearly a process of replication. In normal Earth biology, replication of cell life requires the presence of DNA. But Dr. Lewis could not find evidence of DNA in the proliferating cells inside of his test tubes. Well, that controversial mystery alone, he told me, is why, for a long time, he kept this research of the red Kerala rainwater to himself. But in January of 2006, he contacted the respected astrophysicist and astrobiologist Chandra Ranasinghe at Cardiff University in Wales. Soon, Dr. Ranasinghe had some vials of the red rainwater to study, and he sent some of the vials to biologists at Sheffield University in England. And Dr. Lewis sent more of the red rainwater to scientists at Cornell University in the United States. That was to study isotopic ratios of the elemental composition in the red rainwater. So far, elements confirmed are hydrogen, silicon, oxygen, carbon, and aluminum. They're searching now for phosphorus, which must be present if there is DNA. And they're looking for definitive proof that there is or is not DNA in these mysterious replicating cells from the Kerala red rain. This week, I talked with Dr. Chandra with Ranasinghe at his Cardiff University laboratory. He specialized in the study of interstellar dust during his PhD and SDD work at Cambridge University in England. He is now professor of applied mathematics and astronomy and director of the Cardiff Centre for Astrobiology at Cardiff University in Cardiff, Wales, UK. I asked him if he agreed with Dr. Godfrey Lewis that the red rain cells are a totally new extraterrestrial life form.
We still have many mysteries that have to be resolved, and I don't know how it would be resolved. So far, there's no question that these are biological cells. That was something that was queried by some people. They thought it might be artifacts of some kind, but they certainly all the characteristics of biological cells. They have cell walls. They have some evidence of replication within these thick cell walls. There are sort of daughter cells being produced. And we have so far not been able to definitely say whether there was DNA or not. My position at the moment is still puzzlement, because I have no doubt that the rain fell from skies. In this instance, there is thousands of tons of material, of biological material, that was involved in just the small area of Kerala. It's not clear how much more extensive that region of rainfall was. For instance, if it extended all westwards from Kerala, you have the Indian Ocean and then all the way to the Sahara. So you might have a huge area that was involved, huge geographical area that was involved with this red rain.
Could I ask for clarification? Do you mean that if you put together all of the red cells in the water that was described as falling over a couple of months, that there would be tons of this?
There would be hundreds of tons at the minimum. So think of lifting, if you think of lifting that kind of tonnage of material from the Earth, it's not very easy to understand how that could have happened. One of the theories that has not really been substantiated in any significant way was that this red rain consisted of a spore of some kind of lichen that was blown off the trees in and around Kerala, and it reached the skies and fell over this area. Now we've got samples of the lichen. I brought with me samples of the lichen, and my students are analyzing the lichen situation, comparing the lichen spores with this red rain, and it doesn't seem to be anywhere near the red rain in appearance and characteristics.
Wouldn't a lichen have observable and identifiable DNA?
They certainly would, and it's very easy to locate the DNA and to amplify the DNA. So we need to do that. We haven't done that yet. We need to amplify the lichen DNA and try again to amplify DNA that I think has to exist in these cells. and find some similarities or dissimilarities.
Well, I did talk with Dr. Lewis a week ago. He seems to be relatively definite that there is no DNA and that he is dealing with a completely new kind of replication that he does refer to as extraterrestrial, including the mother cells in which they've documented what he calls the daughter cells, as many as 15 daughter cells in one mother cell and then emerging.
Yeah, we've substantiated that statement. There is already a replication cycle in the whole sample that we have. There are some cells that have 2, 3 daughter cells. Some have more than that. What I have to conclude at the moment is I'm not sure that his claim for no DNA would hold up to rigorous scrutiny. I think he likes to think that there wouldn't be any DNA, and one of the arguments is that his own replication experiment was carried out under high pressure at 300 degrees Celsius. At 300 degrees Celsius, normally you would not expect any fragile molecule like DNA to survive. But I explained to him, and I think he's aware of this, the combination of high temperature and very high pressure would prevent the breakup of even a fragile molecule.
And if there is no DNA in all of these cells, then it means that you have some form of replicating life that is not understood at all?
Absolutely. If that's the case, it's very exciting, but I think as far as we know, all life depends on DNA, and there has to be some pattern-holding template in life, because replication means that patterns are held.
But isn't DNA only known on the Earth, and that we could be dealing with extraterrestrial life that has a completely different metabolism and process of replication?
Well, if that is the case, then it's amazing that these cells look so close to a terrestrial cell. They have all the trappings of terrestrial cells. They have cell walls and so on, and there's a slime around it which is undoubtedly proteinaceous. There are proteins in the cells, so the proteins have to be coded for in some way. And there's no known mechanism that we have on the Earth in terrestrial biology for coding proteins except with DNA.
Beyond 3 D.
Have you been able to identify what makes the cells red when they are red?
No, we haven't. It's not a heme-related molecule. Blood would be the obvious thing to go for and to look for a heme-related molecule, and we haven't found that. It is a pigment of some kind, and we haven't gone as far as identifying the pigment.
So right now, even the red color in these cells is unidentified?
Unidentified, yeah.
Dr. Godfrey said that when the water was collected and he was looking in his lab originally, that the what he calls the mother cells that had the red walls were very quiet and still, and that it was only when they began experimenting with different temperatures that they began to get this odd replication activity, which he said would only begin at 300 degrees centigrade, which is about 600 degrees Fahrenheit. And that is a temperature at which no Earth life that we know would survive in replication at 600 degrees Fahrenheit. Have you been able to replicate that? And
no, we haven't been able to reproduce that result yet. We've made some equipment that we are trying to use for that. He's certainly correct in saying that there's no known replication cycle that's been discovered for Earth macroorganisms at 300 degrees Celsius. Because this is at sort of normal conditions, room temperature and so on. No one knows what Earth organisms would do if you have put them in at pressures of 300 atmospheres and 300 degrees Kelvin. That's an open question as to whether microorganisms could survive at very high temperatures at very high pressures. But I have to say that the replication happening only at 300 degrees Celsius poses a difficulty for me, because I have seen in our laboratories his red rain cells already in a variety of states of replication. There are cells without daughter cells, there are cells with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 daughter cells, and there are cells that appear to be in the process of erupting and unleashing the contents, progeny. where did this replication cycle take place? It certainly didn't happen in situations as tough as we've got. We didn't put it under the 300 degrees in the laboratory or high pressure. So that replication has been happening somewhere. My present thoughts on this are that there was an injection of extraterrestrial microorganisms that took place at the time of the first sonic boom. When it was heard over Kerala, there was a small fragment of comet carrying microorganisms that was unleashed into the clouds. But these microorganisms then had to undergo some kind of replication cycle in the terrestrial clouds with nutrients from the earth lifted up from the trees or whatever. This had to continue for maybe 4 weeks at least.
What you're saying is the temperatures then would not be as high as 300 degrees Celsius there, and that in your laboratory you have been seeing this replication going on at normal room temperature?
Yeah, the replication taking place, but at a very, very slow rate. The fact that we cannot see it happening over a short time scale doesn't mean that it's not happened. These red rain samples that we have with us have been in little tubes for nearly 5 years. And a very slow replication process might be even taking place in the rainwater that is contained in these vials that Godfrey has given us.
And if they had begun in an explosion of, let's say, cometary material in the troposphere, then there was replication in the clouds, the temperature there would not be at 300 degrees Celsius?
Well, the temperature in the clouds could vary. If you go higher up, then it could have very high temperatures. In the troposphere, the temperatures are not much above the boiling point of water, generally. So you will get a range of temperature conditions, but certainly not 300 degrees Celsius and high pressure. You wouldn't have high pressure. If you have 300 degrees Celsius, and if you want to preserve these microorganisms, I would argue that you've got to have a situation in a high pressure container, in a deep interior of a comet, in a deep interior of a planet.
If these are cells that can survive at 300 degrees Celsius and 300 pounds per
square centimeter?
300 pounds per square centimeter pressure, and that's when they had the most rapid growth. You're saying that there still is replication of the mother cells with daughter cells in them that come out at lower temperatures and pressures.
I've got to argue that because I've got to make that case because I find that the cells in the containers in the world are alive. They respond to stimuli, and there are stains that the biologists have used to determine the viability of cells. These are viable cells, and they have very fragile structures within them. If it was just lying around without metabolizing for 5 years, they would be just dead. There is an exchange of material between the rainwater and the nutrients in the rainwater and the cells taking place within these tubes, I think.
What if this is an extraterrestrial life form that does not have DNA in it but can replicate at all these different temperatures and pressures?
What if? Okay, I mean, that's a big if, but I think if that is proven, then we have a totally new life form that we know nothing about. I don't like to deal with things that we know nothing about. We have some desire to anchor our knowledge to known facts, and this becomes difficult to do that. It's almost like saying that silicon-based life, and maybe it's like that.
Well, as an astrobiologist, isn't the entire goal of astrobiology to look for life in other places of the universe without expecting it to be exactly like Earth life?
That's the aim of some astrobiologists, but I think the point of view that I have argued for a couple of decades is that life everywhere is thoroughly mixed. Even if life started on the Earth 4 billion years ago, that same life would have spread to hundreds and hundreds of millions of new star-forming systems that the solar system encountered in its progress around the center of the galaxy.
So what you mean is panspermia, that you would be looking at all life in the universe as seeded from exactly the same kind of DNA?
Seeded from the same kind of DNA and interconnected in a very profound way, interlinked.
But what if that is not the way the universe works?
If it is not the way the universe works, then I think we have to have an open mind and explode the red rain particles as though it was a new discovery of a new form of life.
Has there been any epidemiological study of the Kerala region to see if there was any increase in disease or any impact from hundreds of tons of this material coming down on that region.
We did meet up with various people and we asked them whether there was any adverse effects that were noticed, and the answer was no, they didn't notice anything. That doesn't mean that there wasn't anything that was at a subclinical level or there wasn't anything disastrous, dreadful happened from it.
Mm-hmm. Philosophically, why do you take the position that all life in this vast universe would have the same DNA?
Because I think we are part of a connected solar system formed from material that was recycled through many stars, material that was recycled through many interstellar clouds, of which we know there are hundreds of billions of these clouds, and they're chock-a-block with organic material. So I think that we are connected. Material from which the Earth formed, material out of which life formed on the Earth is certainly connected to a much bigger universe. So I take the view that we are part of a connected chain of beings that exist, reaches from the Earth all the way to the most distant parts of the cosmos.
And if these red rain cells turn out to be a completely new alien extraterrestrial form of life, what would the implications be for you?
The chain of life is still the main thread through the universe, but then there is a continual process by which new life forms are also generated, and that we have not interacted with those new life forms, with those strange life forms, and this is one of the first that we've encountered.
Perhaps by August or September of 2006, Dr. Wick Ranasinghe and his Cardiff and Sheffield colleagues hope to have more information about two major questions, and I'll report their answers at Dreamland and Earth Files. And these are the questions. One, do the Kerala, using his pronunciation, do the Kerala red rain cells have DNA? And could the red rain cells be an unidentified form of yeast or lichen cells from Earth, even though so far nothing has matched? And if the red rain cells came to Earth in ice from a comet that made the one sonic boom heard only once in July of 2001, where did the comet get the red cells? And if the answer to those first questions is no, what can be learned about extraterrestrial cells that don't fit the hypothesis of panspermia, in which all life in the universe would have been seeded from the same DNA? We are on the cusp of perhaps encountering life that is truly not like any life we have ever seen. And I think that a lot of reporters just don't realize the significance of this discovery. What has been a residue in my own mind is, if it did come in on cometary ice, where the heck did the comet get these red cells?
Beyond 3D. Welcome back to tonight's Beyond 3D. Matt, that was a little bit of food for thought in regards to the extraterrestrial biological life that's been discovered in this, or as Linda Moulton Howe best described it, red rain. And there you go. Kind of makes you stop and think about that remake of War of the Worlds, where the red vines were creeping across the ground, across the Earth. You know what else is creeping across the Earth, Matt? According to Greg Braden, is the magnetic polarity, which can reverse and has a strong effect on human DNA. And tonight, Matt, I think we should play this clip and share all this information. Beyond 3D.
I was trained as a scientist. My background's in the hard sciences, physical sciences, the earth sciences. In the 60s and 70s, when I received that training, there was no room for the possibility of the kind of things that we're talking about now, the kinds of things that suggest that our inner world and our inner thoughts, feelings, emotions, beliefs in any way affect the world around us. And it was through direct experience what I began to understand was that this is the great secret that everyone knows except us in the West. Almost any other culture that we go to, from the monasteries in Egypt and Tibet and India and to Bolivia and Peru, the indigenous traditions, little villages in the Andes Mountains, they all know that there is this experience that we can have inside of our bodies that affects our world in some way, and our science simply has not allowed for that historically. Well, I was trained as a scientist, and I was trained to look in the world around me for my answers, so I began to go to these places. I began to go into the monasteries, all the places that I mentioned. And it was through the direct experience of sitting in the presence of people who have lived and practiced the kinds of traditions that Louise Hay and the other authors I'm so blessed to be sharing the stage and this information with, that they teach about. And what we begin to understand is that this is the place where science got it wrong. There are two places, two assumptions that science has made, modern science, and they're coming full circle and correcting that now. But the first one is that the space that we believe is empty is not really so empty. It's full of a living essence, of a living material that we're only beginning to understand, number one. And number two, the fact, and it is a fact now, that we may have experiences inside of our bodies that influence the world beyond our bodies through the conduit of what's in this space. So it was in going into the monasteries and the nunneries and speaking with the indigenous people, looking at them eye to eye, heart to heart, God to God, and I could say to these people, when you just perform that miracle, when you just perform that miraculous healing, what is it that you did inside of your body to make that happen? And if I didn't understand what they told me, I'd ask them again and again and again through the translators until I understood that they were creating an experience, producing an effect inside of their bodies that my science never told me was possible or existed. And that was the path that led me. I just want to emphasize, science is good. And I believe our science is good and served us well. It simply is incomplete. And so it was that path that allowed me to flesh out the missing pieces that we're only beginning to understand today, marrying the best science of our time with the wisdom, 5,000 years of wisdom of our past, into a greater understanding. And that understanding brings us right back to the question. That's a long answer to a short question. But it brings us back to where we're only now beginning to understand that there is something that we can do in our lives that influence not only the physical body, ours and those of other people around us, but literally influence the physical reality of our world, and that changes everything. It changes everything that we in the West believe about ourselves. So as a scientist, I've also come to understand this is a very different way for many people to think about themselves in their world. And I've found that there's a learning curve that our audiences and our friends and families and co-workers in my career at the Water Fountain, this is not something that people typically talk about in a technical organization. They don't wake up in the morning and say, what kinds of feelings, what kinds of dreams, what kinds of healings did you have over the weekend? And they're talking about who won the football game and who won the lotteries. But this is where it brings us, the relevance in our lives, because we all are having experiences every day. Whether we are consciously aware of it or not, those experiences are physically affecting our bodies and our world. What Western science now is beginning to understand, only in the last years of the 20th and now the first years of the 21st century, it is now a scientific fact that the space between things is anything but empty. It is full of a living, pulsating essence that is so new, scientists have yet to agree on a single term. Some are calling it a quantum hologram, very technical sounding name. Dr. Edgar Mitchell, the former Apollo astronaut, I've had the honor of sharing a stage with him a number of times. He calls it nature's mind. Stephen Hawking calls it the mind of God. Others simply call it the field. In 1944, the father of quantum physics, Max Planck, identified the existence of this field, and he called it the matrix. He said, underlying everything that we see, our bodies included, everything we see in the world around us in our bodies, he said, there's the existence of what must be a conscious and intelligent mind. This is his language in 1944. He said that this mind is the matrix of all matter, and it's from his work that the movie series began and many of the ideas that we have today. So what we know is this, is that we have the opportunity to influence that field in ways now that we're only beginning to understand. It's done through the human heart. It's not a thinking process. Thoughts are important. But the ancients made a distinction between thoughts and feelings and emotions. And it's the feelings that are centered in our heart, what are called coherent, heart-based emotions. We know that when we feel a feeling of love, compassion, understanding, forgiveness, when we change the self-esteem, that there's an effect from that it changes the electrical and the magnetic fields in our heart, and that those fields literally change the stuff that our world is made of around our bodies. Our hearts are the strongest magnetic field in our bodies, and our hearts are the strongest electrical field in our bodies, much more so than the brain. While the brain does create those kinds of fields, the heart is many times stronger. And what the science now is showing is that when you can change the field that the atom is in, you change the atom, and we're made of those atoms. So when we have feelings in our hearts, we're changing the field that connects the stuff everything is made of, and we literally are altering our physical reality in ways that sound miraculous in Western science. But again, this is the great secret everyone knows except us, because Western science has only arrived at this understanding. You go to these ancient and indigenous traditions and cultures, it's where they begin. They begin with the understanding, sure, everything's connected, and sure, we're part of it. And then they take us one step further and they say, here, I'll show you. I'll show you how to create the effects in your body so that you can heal your body and you can heal the bodies of others. You can change your self-esteem and your body will mirror that change. It doesn't have to be a long, slow, drawn-out process. It can happen very, very quickly. It can happen in a matter of minutes. We have video documentation from medicineless hospitals in Beijing, China, for example, where they understand these practices and they've employed them for several thousand years. And we can look into the body of a living woman with a cancerous tumor that Western science says is inoperable. And then we can watch as three practitioners that understand the language of human emotion. They create the feeling in their bodies. They're not looking at that tumor as an illness. They see that woman as whole, healthy, vital, completely enabled, fully capacitated. And as they feel that feeling strongly among themselves, her physical body mirrors that. And we can see it through sonograms. We can see that tumor disappear in less than 3 minutes. And that's how quickly reality can change. And this is where the disconnect comes in with Western science. Because I've shared this information with scientists and medical doctors all over the world, and they say, wow, it's a miracle. We're going to have to come back and study this, and we will as soon as we find a cure for cancer, or as soon as we find the cure to cure on the mechanical level, what they see as a mechanical process. And what we now know is our physical body is the outpicturing, is the mirror of something that is not so physical. And this is where science now is only arriving. The three practitioners in the medicineless hospital in Beijing did not judge that cancerous tumor. They didn't judge it right, wrong, good, or bad. They said it's a quantum possibility, and there are many possibilities. Of course, this is just one. They said, now we're going to choose another one. But this is a subtle and very, very different way of looking at things, because they acknowledge what is and invite a new possibility rather than having a charge on what is there and feeling that somehow we have to manipulate or cut out, in the case of a tumor, or change, hammer the physical reality into submission. What they're doing is acknowledging that moment, that example, and they're changing it on the level of what we would call the quantum blueprint. They're feeling the feeling as if another possibility has occurred, and in doing so, allowing that possibility to replace the one that exists without judging the one that exists. I was an aerospace engineer in Denver, Colorado during the last years of the Cold War, the 1980s, and it was when the famous brown cloud was inundating Denver, and we couldn't all drive on the same days. We had to carpool on different days. And one day I went to an engineer friend's house to do my carpool for that week, and I got there a little early. And I'd never been to his house before, and I said, can I use your bathroom? And I went in there, and he had little Post-it notes of affirmations all over the bathroom, and it said, "My perfect mate is manifesting for me now. My perfect mate is manifesting for me now." We got in his car, and he had little Post-it notes all over the dashboard and the rearview mirror. "My perfect mate is manifesting for me now." And of course, I knew what his office looked like, and it was the same way. He had them all over the walls in the CRT. I said, "Does this affirmation work for you?" He said, "Nah." He said, "It never does." And I said, "Why do you think that is?" And he said, well, look at me. Who'd want to be with somebody like me? I'm just an engineer. You know, he had a very low self-esteem about himself. And I began to think about the way that he was applying those affirmations, and other people have applied them very successfully. And what I found the difference was, for him, it was a thought process that never went beyond what was happening in his mind, in his own picturing, his own self-esteem. And the thought is important. The ancients are very clear about this in the Sanskrit text. They tell us that the thought is the image of the quantum possibility.
Beyond 3D.
So in other words, in the realm of all possibilities, everything already exists. My friend's perfect relationship and the worst one he'll ever have. The lightest of the light, the darkest of the dark. Our greatest healing and our greatest suffering, they're already there. And what they invite us to do in these ancient traditions is to reach into those possibilities with our mind. This is the power of the mind. And isolate, we lock in one of those possibilities. So now we have taken it and identified it. However, to bring it into this world, to breathe life into that possibility, is the power of human emotion. Our love for that possibility, or our fear of that possibility, either one will work. To bring that quantum possibility into the particle reality of our everyday lives. We don't have to know that. It sounds very technical. We just have a feeling. But this is the science of, appears to be the science of how these things are working. So this is why our self-esteem is so important. When we feel, when my engineer friend felt that, why would anybody want to be with me, is what he said to me. The affirmation for him was an empty affirmation. It was a thought that had no energy to invite it into this world. And an example of just the opposite of that is, I know of other people who have simply made a list of all of the attributes of a perfect partner in life, because this is what many people, I'm using as an example. It works in healing, it works in peace, but we're talking about relationships. They make a list of all those attributes, and then they come from the place that relationship is already happening. What is their life like? How is their life different now that perfect partner is there? How is their evening different? How do they spend their time differently? How do they feel when they wake up in the morning and share their lives with someone? And it's those feelings that they live throughout the day. It's not something you sit down and do for a minute and then you get up and walk away. Rather, it's something that we become. We live our lives as if these experiences have already happened, and in that way we invite them into our lives, and they happen frighteningly quickly for some people. It's amazing. I know people that haven't finished their list, and they go out for lunch or a cup of coffee while they're making the list, and the person that just brought them their lunch is the person that's on that list, and they fall in love and they're married 20 years later. I know people that's happened to. So it's about clarity. It's about specificity. It's about being personal. Being very clear that these are personal desires. Scientifically, it appears that this field, the divine matrix, it is a mirror and a bridge between our inner and our outer worlds. And it can only give us what we give it to work with. And the interesting thing is that we have been conditioned to feel the feelings of the things that we don't want in life and that we're afraid of. We wake up in the morning and we see the 6 o'clock news and all the things to be afraid of, and then we go through our day saying, oh, I hope I'm not going to see that today, or I hope it's not around the corner. And my question so fascinating me, where do we learn to feel the things that we don't want rather than things that we choose to have? And how would our lives be different if we could cut through all of the static and simply choose in our lives what we would like each moment of each day, or our relationships, or our abundance, or our careers, or the peace in our families to look like? What would our lives look like if we could do that? And there's very good scientific evidence showing precisely what our lives would look like, because we would very quickly experience everything that we've created. As a scientist, one of the first things I had to understand, and again, my training, I was trained in the hard sciences, and there was no allowance for any inner experience to have an effect on our outer world to begin with. Number two, I was raised in a relatively conservative community in the Midwest. I was born in Missouri, Kansas City, Missouri. Excuse me, in that part of the world, when you talk about emotions, they kind of get lumped into this nebulous experience. So, thoughts, feelings, emotions are all the same thing. We really don't talk about them much. And by the way, as a male, we don't want to see much of yours. So that was my upbringing. So I began to understand when we go into the other cultures, and I'm referring again and again to this wisdom. We had this wisdom in Western cultures, and it was lost in the 4th century. About 1,700 years ago, it was edited right out of our most cherished spiritual and religious traditions, the biblical edits of the 4th century. It was not edited from the other cultures that we've visited, and that's the value of going into these cultures. And they identify 3 separate yet related experiences that we all have in our bodies, and they literally call them thought, feeling, and emotion. And here's the difference. The thinking they identify with the 3 upper energy centers of the body. The Sanskrit traditions have a 7 energy center or 7 chakra system that they work with. And they say the upper 3 are related to what we call thought or logic processes. So when we think about something, we picture it in our mind, that perfect relationship or peace between nations. But we can only invite it into our lives when we breathe the power of emotion into that thought. The emotion comes from the lower 3 of those creative centers in our bodies. So when we breathe the power of emotion into our thought, we imbue that thought with life. And those 2 energies meet in the one center that is not accounted for yet in our model. It's in our heart, or what scientists call the 7-layer liquid crystal oscillator in the center of our chest. But we'll just call it our heart, because that's what it does. Our heart is creating electrical and magnetic waves that are influencing the world around us based on what we think and the emotion that we breathe into those thoughts to create the feeling. So now we've just defined feeling. Feeling, by definition, from the Sanskrit tradition, is the union of thought and emotion, creates the feeling. Now what makes this really interesting is that those traditions say we are capable of only 2 primary emotions: love and whatever we feel the opposite of love is. And when you get really deep into the teachings, there are 2 aspects of the same thing. But what they say is when we have our thought, we are either breathing the love of that thought or our fear of that thought to create the feeling. And the feeling then becomes sadness or joy or compassion or anger. Those are not emotions, those are feelings. Now for some people they say, well, you're nitpicking. What difference could it make? And these are the subtle differences between these ancient ways of viewing this inner technology. It's literally a technology, because we can have the same thought or the same affirmation and imbue it with a different emotion and have completely different feelings and create a different outcome. And this is the great secret that was edited out of our Christian and pre-Christian, Judeo-Christian traditions. When 45 books were removed in the 4th century, 20 were taken out completely. Another 25 were condensed and rearranged. And we know this because we found the information now in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, the Coptic, the Gnostic texts. So we know what those texts would have said if we had had them. But the interesting thing is, without those texts, we tend to rely upon the written word, the validation, to feel that power in our bodies. I think everyone senses or suspects that there's an untapped potential in the human body. I've been on every continent of the earth, and I've asked every audience I've ever been in, do you feel that that's there? And they say, yes, we feel there's something there, but we just can't quite get it. Why is that? So we have a feeling that there's more to us, but we rely on a written validation in a 5,000-year-old text or a scientific study to tell us that it's true. And this is, I think, the value of going into those texts, is we get to see the words that literally say, in the Gospel of Thomas, the Lost Gospel of Thomas, it literally says, when these 2 become one, when thought and emotion become one, then you'll say to the mountain, move, and the mountain will move. And I used to think that that was a metaphor. And I now have seen enough to know that moving a cancerous tumor inside the body of a living woman That's moving a mountain to me. And it's all done from marrying thought and emotion together. In 1998, I had my first journey into the highlands of central China and Tibet. And it was during that time we were given a personal audience with an abbot, who's an elderly leader of a particular sect in the monastery. And this abbot passed just a couple of years ago, so I'm glad that we spoke with him when we did. And it was this man, I asked the question that I asked every monk, every nun, I asked the shaman in Peru and Bolivia, that I had the clearest response from this man. And I asked him a question. I said, when we see your prayers on the outside, and we see you in the chanting hall for 12, 16, 18 hours a day, and we see the bells and the bowls and the mudras and the mantras and the gongs and the chimes and the incense, when we see your prayers on the outside, I said, what are you doing on the inside? And this was the man that looked at me. He said, you've never seen our prayers, because a prayer cannot be seen. He said, what you see are the things we do to create the feeling in our body, and the feeling is the prayer. And then he turned the question on me, and he said, how do you do this in your culture? Through a translator. And I began to think about this and realized that when we lost the words in our most cherished spiritual traditions that tell us that feeling is a language that speaks to our bodies in this world, and we lost the words that validated that, we began to think that the words themselves were the prayers, and if we say, or the affirmations, and if we say those words the right number of times, the right time of day or the right time of year, that we've said our prayer or our affirmation, and then if it doesn't work, we get frustrated and we say, well, my prayer didn't work, or my affirmation's not working for me, because we lost the link with feeling and emotion.
Beyond 3D. Welcome back tonight to Beyond 3D, and that is all we have time for. Be sure to check out our Facebook page, which is Beyond 3- and the letter D. Until next week, everybody, take care and good night. Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.